Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of How to Leave a Cult. I am Brooke Walker. Welcome back to season 2. So, I figured we'd start out today with a little intro. How to Leave a Cult is my biography of being raised in a religious cult where we spoke to spirits that were thousands of years old for spiritual advice. And every part of our lives were controlled, from our living situations to our marriages, our career choices, you name it, it was controlled by a high control religion. And it was a church called the Church of Immortal Consciousness. And I'm here to share my story with you, which is about a very abusive, controlling childhood and adulthood. And the other part that I share is kind of the psychology about how churches and specifically cults use manipulation and control and the impact that that creates. And then I also try to give you some insights and some tips into the healing process. So if you are somebody you know has spent any time in a religious cult or a high control religion, that can be very scarring. So, from having spent more than 20 years of my life in one, I try to give you things that could be useful for you to use to take away from and hopefully heal and be able to live a very fulfilling life after that experience that doesn't hold you back from things. And I'm going to talk about, specifically, I'm going to talk about triggers today towards the end. So, recapping a little bit about last season. So, last season, we started off with actually how my family joined the church when I was the age of 8 and ended up with the destruction of my marriage. So, and went through a lot of things through my teenage years, the manipulation of the church, how we used to talk to the spirit, different practices, spiritual practices we had. One called the process. Another, we used to do something called bhajans, which is a Indian tradition that got sprinkled into what we did. And then I get into the marriage, which was a arranged marriage, and then how that marriage was also destroyed by the cult, and the birth of my kids, which went from about the age of 17 to 22. So a very short period of time. So today we are going to talk about different things that were happening in the church and in the school that was run by the church that had been started by the church. We're going to talk about the expectations, what it was like for me that now that I was like suddenly single and raising 2 children by myself, and the effects of spiritual expectations, not just in my church, but in a lot of churches, and how that is very damaging. Yeah, and then we're going to talk about triggers and what to do about them. And I'm also going to talk about many well-known names that came through the school. Some that you've probably heard of. Okay. So, the ending of the last episode, I talked about my divorce and how emotionally devastating that was. Everything leading up to, everything, my marriage and my life was consumed with the idea that being in this church and this community was all revolving around what they called like vibration, but simply put, you could say that it was soulmates. And a lot of religions have some version of this. It's that you marry somebody and that is your person till death do you part type of thing. So growing up as a teenager, we were often told, like, you will be told who you are going to marry. It is not something that you decide. It is something the spirit decides. And so being put in the relationship that I was put in, I thought that it was a like vibration relationship. I thought he was my soulmate. Now, I didn't have a lot of I there was most of my ideas up to that point was about the duty of being in a relationship. It was not necessarily about the attraction emotionally or otherwise that I had. It was like, this is what I'm expected to do so that I can go to God, and that I can. It was all these spiritual expectations. So it was all these stair steps to being a spiritual woman and having spiritual children and doing things that I was told to do. So when my husband left and told me that he could no longer be in the community we were in, the church community, and all the families we were around, and it was often referred to as the collective or the community. When he said, I can't be here anymore because I can't do this, I was gaslit by all the people around me and told, he's lying to you. He doesn't love you. And that was devastating because I believed it. So I began to just believe that men lie, and men lie to me specifically. And I'm just too dumb to really know the difference, and that he didn't ever love me. And it had nothing to do with all these outside circumstances. And also now I'm single. And so this means that I've just destroyed the one thing that can't be destroyed, which is a spiritual relationship. And now I'm a single mother of 2 babies. Like, my daughter was a toddler. My son was 15 months older than her. So I've got a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I'm working full time for my dad, who is an attorney. And I'm a paralegal, secretary, legal assistant, some version of that. I do all of those things. And there's all these changes began to happen in the church around that time. And it was partially because the things that had led up to that moment, and it was partially because of the breakdown of a lot of things. So they had created this whole belief system that required things to run a certain way, but it had never been tested or tried and true, and they had never done it. So, like, my sister's generation, my generation, even my brother's generation, we were all like the guinea pigs in some sense. And then you had my baby sister, who's 9 years younger than me, who was born in the church and in the community. And there was a whole generation of kids that were born around that time, a little bit older than my sister, and then on down. And so they were kind of like an expectation that they were going to be like a higher level of what was expected out of this church because they were all born there. The rest of us, like, we had brought a lot of our damage in because our parents hadn't been in it long enough. But like, as the generations got closer to the ones that were all born with it, there was an even higher level of expectation. But with like my generation and my sister's generation, like, there was this more of an expectation of like they had to beat out of us the old stuff. And specifically, like, me and my group of friends, we were the fuck ups. We were the like the my sister and her and the girls her age, and it was mostly girls, there was a few boys, like, they were all less naughty than us. And we're not even really naughty in the big scheme of things, but that was the impression that was always put upon us because uh, we did things behind their back as teenagers, and we were a little bit rebellious. But then, like, this younger group of kids that grew up, they had there was many new parents. So like with me and my older sister, there was like half of the people were parents. But once you got to the younger ones, then you had like Trina and Steven's kids had kids their age. And so it wasn't just somebody else's kids they were messing with. They were messing it was their kids had the expectations put on them. I look back a lot and see where Stephen Marlowe, who Marlowe is Trina and Steven's daughter, and then her husband Steve Wrench, it's like they had a lot of rules that went out the window as soon as their kids were old enough to have to implement a lot of those rules. And sometime around this time, there was a trance where Duran, the spirit that would speak through Trina, who was centuries years old, came through and told everybody that was at that particular trance, this younger generation, who was supposed to be with who, like vibration wise. And it infuriated a ton of parents because there was so many different relationships that had been not living up to the expectation, like mine. And there was various ones. There was various ones that were falling apart and that weren't, or that just didn't, that were forced together, and they were not the happiest because they're two people that would have never chosen to be together. They were put together for manipulative reasons by the church leaders. So this younger generation are all in school now, and they're all in the Shelby School. And these are all kids that have been going to the Shelby School since the first day, where we had all jumped in the middle stages. And so these kids, and, it has somehow we've gotten past being able to get a charter. So it's a charter school. So there's enrollees from outside, and now there's money coming into the school from the state. There's also, they start bringing in all these extracurricular programs. And these are ones that they were able to get from here and there. So they started doing basketball. And they created a basketball team because there was a lot of young boys. And so they have this basketball team, and they created a huge basketball tournament that was in Payson, Arizona, called the Copper State Jam. And all these kids would compete against much larger schools coming from all over the state. And we would go, and I did concessions for it for a long time. And then they created a chess program. And the chess program used to win national championships against much larger schools. And part of it is Stephen Camp, and I don't even know how it happened exactly, but Stephen Camp was involved in the chess world, and he got a relationship with Igor Ivanov. Igor Ivanov was a chess master who defected from Russia. If you know anything in the chess world, you may have heard Igor Ivanov's name. I looked him up on Wikipedia just for fun before I did this episode. And the funny thing is there's this whole piece of time that's missing where it doesn't mention that he lived in Arizona in a cult. Now, Igor was not so much in the cult. He was like an accessory. So he wasn't exactly like going to the processes. He did go to trances, but he was instrumental in the chess team that the Shelby School had. And there's articles about it. When you think of championship dynasties, the New York Yankees, Green Bay Packers, Boston Celtics, and Kentucky Wildcats come to mind. In grade school chess competition, a more unlikely dynasty is taking shape. This one in Arizona at a tiny private school outside of Payson. A year ago, the Shelby School won first place in the kindergarten 6th grade division in the National Elementary Chess Championships. Last week in the school, an enrollment of 65 retained that title and added a national championship in the kindergarten 3rd grade division. Shelby's top player, 12-year-old Danny Gordon, tied for individual first place honors. More than 17,000 students took part in the tournament held this year in Peoria, Illinois. How did the Shelby kids do? How do the Shelby kids do it? Good old-fashioned hard work, lots of family support, and Igor, said Trina Camp, who founded the nonprofit, non-sectarian school with her husband, Stephen. They pulled the religious stuff out of it, but they still had a lot of the tenets that they did in the school. So these kids are well-rounded and have other interests, but they study chess and play it 3 or 4 hours a day, she said. Even with all that practice, they probably wouldn't have made it big without the assistance of Igor Ivanov, an international master who immigrated from Russia in 1980 and is an 8-time American chess Grand Prix winner. He became friends with Stephen Camp at a tournament 2 years ago and agreed to help the team, which basically means that we financially supported him and gave him somewhere to live and gave him a ton of vodka. I'm sorry I'm derogatory in my use of how that came about, but that's really what happened. I enjoy coaching because chess is good for kids and good for society, Ivanov said. They can learn at a young age how to think logically. The team takes tournaments seriously. Players aren't allowed to eat any junk food or swim because the chlorine might bother their eyes. Afterward, they celebrate with pizza, Pringles, and a pool party. Joining Danny on the winning 6th grade team are Peter and Jeffrey Mulcahy, Paul Silver, and Wellington Casuto. 3rd grade team members are Fitch Wrench, Morgan Casuto, Oliver Lewinson, Hank Jones, and Harper Camp. The Shelby School, which accepts students through high school, has been in operation since 1994 in Tonto Village. Personal instruction is emphasized with a maximum teacher-student ratio of 10-1. Most parents are strongly involved, sometimes volunteering as teacher's aides. Tuition is $4,800 a year. Shelby wasn't the only Arizona champions in this year's national tournament. Phoenix Country Day, which is a very big Arizona school. Danny Gordon's chess rating of 1991 is among the highest in the country for his age. Matt Guthrie, former state champion in Phoenix Country Days coach, says the 12-year-old's potential is unlimited. I've played Danny twice, and I had to work very hard to beat him. Not only does he have talent, he has an exceptional attitude and work ethic. Takes all 3 of those things to be the best. Danny has learned to ignore the psych-out efforts of some opponents. I concentrate on the board and don't look at them, he said. The only time I get nervous is when I know I'm losing. Then I have to play really hard. And when he wins, I don't jump up and down or anything. That's not polite. I just feel proud and hug everybody I know. He will have a tougher test this weekend when he takes on older players and the National Junior High School Championship at Phoenix Civic Center. Danny has his sights set on improving his rating to a master's level of 2,200 by the time he's 13. That would be no small achievement. Bobby Fischer, the country's most acclaimed chess player, didn't become a master until he was 14. America isn't looking for Bobby Fischer anymore, said Stephen Camp. For the sake of chess in the United States, we need a new homegrown champion. He might be growing up in the tall pines east of Payson. So, not a small thing. Then, the other thing they began to add to the Shelby School was ballet. And this was really kind of in contrast to all the things that they had the boys doing. My mom implemented the ballet because she was very frustrated by the fact that she felt like there was all these things for boys and nothing for the girls to be able to strive for and do. So originally she had gotten a woman named um, Blanche, who had a background in ballet. And then she actually she reached out to the Phoenix Ballet and was able to get their prima ballerina at the time, who was Yen Li Chen, who now has a school. Her and her husband used to come and they would teach dance to the girls. They were never involved in the church in any particular way, but they did come and teach the girls who were at the school. And so there was all this thriving stuff going on. These kids were beginning to grow into something, which was in huge contrast to what the kids older than them, like me, my sister who's 3 years older than me, my brother who's 4 years younger than me, like our generations, it was just about like, this is what you're going to do. And there was not a pathway to something like this. It wasn't until this generation, like the generation that was born into the church, that there was like all these other things that were brought up that they could think about wanting to grow up to and strive to. So I think that made it even more difficult to get to this age of being 22 years old and having this failed relationship, because that was everything I was raised for, which is sick and pathetic, but I'm just telling you what the environment was, right? Everything I've been built up to believe in and strive for is to have a spiritual relationship. And I've destroyed it because you can't fuck it up. This is what I've been told. You can't fuck it up if it's meant to be in God. So, so I just think it's me. I'm the problem. I'm the reason it's not working. There is something just intrinsically flawed inside of me because of this. And I honestly think that the number one problem with religion is that it creates a system where it's not flawed, that you're the flawed one, which is horrible. It's horrible to come from something and think that, well, this has been going on forever, so it must be me. And religion doesn't age well. Spiritual practices don't tend to age very well. If you look over the years, things have changed dramatically in all these different faiths. And I've worked with clients who've come out of just mainstream stuff and have lost faith that there's some kind of deeper power out there because they were told that because they didn't fit into this box, there must be something wrong with them. Or because they didn't live up to some standard that is ridiculous, that's impossible for people to live up to. Even getting divorces can devastate somebody's expectation about their spirituality, which is so difficult to overcome. So then I'm newly divorced. There's all this stuff going on that seems like it's really successful, but there's this beginning of a breakdown because the parents of these kids, and my parents were one of them too, are beginning to see a different expectation for the future of what their kids are supposed to be. So the idea that they're going to be controlled and be all manipulated into getting married is already not jiving. And they've all been told this the kids that are supposed to be marrying each other, and they're already starting and these kids are not even old enough to be thinking about it yet, but they're already starting to not be okay with that. And then the money began to break down because you had too many people who weren't working and weren't bringing in money, and then the handful of people that were supporting stuff. So I had shared in one of the in last season that they had done something called podding, POD, pod. So they had broken up and made it that everybody was in this group, that there was all these individual groups that they were calling pods that would financially support each other so that it wasn't all done by in the middle. And sometime around there, right after I'd gotten separated from, or right after I was in the middle of my divorce, my dad, it's, my parents get this, I could always tell every time my parents had gotten something that wasn't something that they had authentically decided to do. And this was one of them. So my parents sit us down and basically say, you guys need to figure out how to begin financially supporting yourselves and stop expecting your father to do it. Now, I just got divorced, or am in the middle of a divorce. And now I'm supposed to figure out with two babies how I'm supposed to financially support myself while I work for my dad, who's not paying me enough money to financially support myself. And he never has. Never did during that time. So I began spiraling. And let me recap a few major points at the time that caused me to spiral. So because we're now in pods, even though I've babysat for everybody for years for free, now I've got to pay for babysitting. I had no education, which my grandparents had offered to pay for, but I wasn't allowed to go get one because I was supposed to get married and have kids. I had never worked a real job. I had worked in the school. I had worked in the restaurant, also, both not getting paid. Well, the school I got paid a couple dollars an hour. I had worked, and when I mean a couple dollars an hour, I mean a couple dollars an hour. I had worked for my dad, but I had not worked a real job for anybody that was not in the church, which means I had never really gotten paid anything. I'd never paid bills. I had never made a rent payment. What a fucking disservice to somebody at 22 who had two kids. And now it's like, you kind of need to figure out what you're doing with your life. And I remember, and I have no emotional skills at the time either. None. I don't know how to manage emotions. I'd never been taught any of that kind of stuff. So that is kind of one of the big moments. There was turning points during this where I began to, these huge breakdowns in expectation versus what I had to offer to give, or all the things that had fallen apart, were the moments that I began stepping out and began realizing that what I was in was not right and was dysfunctional. So I can sit and talk about how bad that was, and it was, but it also began to open my eyes because I'm a very intelligent person who had been taught never to trust myself. And as I began to see these things, that's that was like the beginning of doors opening for me, that I began to see to become the person that I am now, so to speak. So I thought today would be a good day to talk about triggers. That's enough of the story today. We will resume next week or next episode. So I want to talk about triggers because I think it's a really important thing. Everybody talks about triggers all the time, but I want to talk about triggers in response to having trauma. We're going to use a little picture to give you an example of this, okay? So let's say this is you or me or anybody who's been through trauma. Or let's say it's a normal person. And around you, let's say you have a couple of these landmines. And when anybody gets close to you, they have the likeliness that they're going to step on a landmine. This is one of your triggers. This is something that, because of a past experience that you haven't healed, can cause you to have a reaction. Now, it may be no fault of theirs. And this is the main thing I want you to understand when we're talking about triggers. Triggers is about you. It's not about other people. You're the one who has the landmine. But let's say you had a really traumatic childhood. It's almost impossible for somebody to get close to you without hitting a trigger, because you have a lot more landmines, because you've had a lot more trauma. And I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm just trying to, like, in a light way, explain that there's no way for somebody to get close to you without having to get into this. And you need to understand that it's your job and your responsibility to know when somebody lands on one of these, that it's not necessarily about them, and it's also not a reason to push them away. The right people will still want to come close to you, and you need to realize that instead of pushing somebody away, you need to begin to learn how to disarm these. So, what's an example? My example of the week. And the people that I love most are the ones who typically hit these, unfortunately. Occasionally strangers do, but most strangers don't affect me that much. But so, for example, my daughter was helping me with something this week, and she's got some expertise in it. And so she was looking something over, and she's like, no, none of this is going to work. So all of a sudden, I became 10 years old again with my dad correcting my English papers with a red pen. Now, that is not her fault. That is my trigger. It is my responsibility to see that that's about me, and anything that emotionally brings you over a 5, pretty much you can count on the fact that it is old. So I knew that was about me, and then I identified why, and then I have to go, you know what? That's a trigger that I have, and I need to disarm this, and I need to understand that I'm not that person anymore, and I can get past this, and everything's going to be okay. And you have to figure out how to disarm this, okay? Because it's your landmine. You got to dig it up, you got to disarm it, and you got to get rid of it so that it doesn't prevent you from growing and creating beautiful, wonderful relationships with the people that you care most about and love. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today. Thank you for allowing me to have a nice break getting through the holidays. I'm excited for season 2. Have an amazing day. Please like, share, and give me a 5-star review. And have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.